The morning I became a bride began with soft light spilling through lace curtains onto the hotel room floor. My name is Sarah. I'm 32, and this day had been years in the making. I sat at the vanity, staring at my reflection, still not quite believing it was real. My chest fluttered with nerves and joy tangled together. Outside the window, I could hear birds and distant traffic, the city waking up just like any other day, except today wasn't ordinary at all. My bridesmaids arrived one by one, each carrying garment bags and coffee cups, filling the quiet room with warmth and noise. Claire, my younger sister, burst through the door first, grinning ear to ear. "Today's the day," she said, squeezing my shoulders. I laughed, though my hands were already trembling. Emma followed with a tray of pastries none of us would eat, too nervous, too excited, too focused on the hours stretching ahead of us before the ceremony began. The hairstylist arrived shortly after, setting up her station near the window where the light was best. I sat still as she curled strand after strand, weaving small white flowers through my hair. Every pull of the brush felt like a countdown, each minute bringing me closer to becoming someone's wife. I watched myself transform in the mirror, feeling both like myself and like a stranger stepping into a new chapter of her life. Claire noticed I kept glancing at my phone between hairspray and bobby pins. "Waiting for someone?" she asked gently, already knowing the answer. I nodded, biting my lip. I hadn't heard from Mom all morning, not even a text wishing me luck. It wasn't like her to stay silent on something this big, and a small knot of worry began forming in my stomach beneath all the excitement. The makeup artist began her work next, dabbing foundation across my cheeks with practiced precision. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing, trying to push away the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Emma chattered about the flowers arriving downstairs, about the weather being perfect for outdoor photos. I nodded along, but my mind kept drifting back to my mother and her unusual silence. By the time my makeup was finished, the room had grown warmer, filled with hairspray and perfume and nervous laughter. I looked at myself properly for the first time and felt tears prick my eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer weight of the moment. Claire caught my reflection and smiled softly. "You look beautiful, Sarah," she whispered, and for a second I let myself simply feel proud. James texted me a photo of himself in his suit, looking handsome and slightly nervous, with the caption, "Can't wait to see you." I smiled at my phone, warmth spreading through my chest. He had been steady and patient through every wedding stress, every late-night planning session. I typed back a heart and set the phone down, my thoughts briefly settling before drifting once more toward my mother's silence. The wedding coordinator knocked on the door, reminding us we had 1 hour left before photos began. Panic and excitement rippled through the room as everyone scrambled to finish getting ready. Claire zipped herself into her bridesmaid dress while Emma helped pin the veil into place. I stood at the center of it all, feeling like the eye of a storm, calm on the outside despite everything swirling within me. I finally decided to call my mother myself, instead of waiting any longer for her to reach out. My fingers hovered over her name in my contacts, my heart pounding with a strange mixture of hope and dread. Claire glanced over, sensing my hesitation. "Go ahead," she said softly. "Maybe she's just running late." I took a breath and pressed call, praying everything was simply fine. The phone rang twice before I heard the click of her picking up, and immediately I could hear noise in the background, unfamiliar and bright. Waves, distant laughter, music that didn't belong to any hotel room I recognized. My stomach tightened instantly. "Mom?" I said carefully. "Sarah, honey," she answered, her voice light and breezy. Nothing like someone rushing to get ready for her daughter's wedding. "Where are you?" I asked, though part of me already feared the answer. There was a pause, then a small laugh that didn't match the seriousness building inside me. "I'm actually at the beach," she said casually, as if she were mentioning the weather. My mind went blank for a moment, refusing to process what I was hearing. Claire noticed my expression shift and stepped closer, concern flashing across her face. "The beach?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, my wedding is today." Another pause, longer this time, filled only by the sound of waves crashing behind her. When she finally spoke again, her tone carried no urgency, no panic, nothing close to the reaction I desperately needed from her. "I know, sweetheart," she said. A trip sounded more fun." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. I stood frozen in the middle of the hotel room, phone pressed against my ear, surrounded by flowers and dresses and everything meant to celebrate this day. Claire mouthed, "What happened?" but I couldn't answer yet. My mother's careless laughter echoed faintly through the phone, completely detached from the moment shattering inside me. "You forgot?" I managed to say, my voice cracking despite my effort to stay composed. "No, I didn't forget," she replied simply. "I just decided this trip sounded better than sitting through another long ceremony." Her honesty was somehow worse than if she had lied. I felt heat rush to my face, tears blurring the edges of my vision as reality settled heavily onto my chest. Claire took the phone gently from my shaking hand when she saw I couldn't speak anymore. "Mom, this is Sarah's wedding," she said sharply, her voice tight with disbelief. I heard my mother's muffled response, still light, still unbothered, as if we were overreacting to something trivial. I turned away, pressing my palm against my mouth to keep from breaking down completely in front of everyone. Emma quietly ushered the makeup artist and hairstylist out of the room, giving us space without saying a word. The silence that followed felt heavier than any noise could have been. Claire ended the call and set the phone down carefully, then wrapped her arms around me. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I let myself lean into her for just a moment, needing something solid to hold on to. "I don't understand," I said finally, my voice shaking. "How could she just not come?" Claire had no easy answer, only a tight hug and gentle reassurance that today was still mine to celebrate. I wiped my eyes carefully, terrified of ruining the makeup I had just spent an hour perfecting. Somewhere beneath the hurt, a quiet resolve began forming, insisting I would not let this moment destroy my day. I walked to the mirror and studied myself again, veil pinned perfectly, dress fitted exactly as I had dreamed it would be. My mother's absence sat heavily in my chest, but I forced myself to breathe through it. James was waiting. My friends were waiting. This day belonged to more than just one person's careless choice, and I refused to let her laughter define how I would remember it. Claire touched up my makeup where a single tear had escaped, dabbing gently with a tissue. "You don't need her here to be happy today," she said softly, though we both knew the words were easier said than felt. I nodded, unable to speak without my voice cracking again. Outside, I could hear the faint sound of guests arriving, chatter and laughter drifting up from the garden below. The coordinator knocked again, gently reminding us it was time to move to the ceremony space. Claire squeezed my hand one last time before opening the door, her eyes silently asking if I was ready. I straightened my shoulders, forcing composure over the storm still raging inside me. Whatever had just happened with my mother, I would carry it quietly and walk forward, because today was still my wedding. As we stepped into the hallway, I caught my reflection once more in a tall mirror near the elevator, veil catching the light, dress flowing perfectly behind me. For a brief second, I almost looked like nothing was wrong. Claire walked beside me, close enough that I could feel her steady presence anchoring me. My phone buzzed once more in my hand, and I glanced down, half expecting another excuse. It wasn't my mother. It was James, checking in with a simple message asking if I was okay, saying he couldn't wait to marry me. I felt a small, genuine smile break through despite everything. I typed back a quick reply, letting myself hold on to that warmth instead of the coldness my mother had left behind. Claire noticed the shift in my expression and smiled too, relieved to see it. We reached the garden entrance where soft music had already begun playing, guests seated in neat rows beneath strings of white lights. My father waited near the entrance, ready to walk me down the aisle in my mother's place, unaware yet of what had happened. I hesitated only a moment before stepping forward, determined not to let sadness overshadow the love waiting for me just beyond those doors. My father noticed my red-rimmed eyes immediately and reached for my hand, concern flashing across his face. "What's wrong?" he asked quietly. I shook my head, not wanting to explain everything right before walking down the aisle. "I'll tell you after," I whispered, forcing a smile. He studied me for a moment, then nodded, trusting me enough to let it go, at least for now. The music shifted, signaling it was time. My heartbeat quickened, nerves and heartbreak tangled together as I took my father's arm. Claire lined up ahead of me with the other bridesmaids, glancing back one final time with a reassuring smile. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself, pushing my mother's laughter to the back of my mind as the doors opened and every guest turned to look at me. Standing at the threshold, veil catching the afternoon breeze, I saw James at the end of the aisle, his eyes lighting up the moment he saw me. Whatever pain my mother had caused that morning, it couldn't erase the love waiting ahead. I took my first step forward, holding my father's arm tightly, carrying both heartbreak and hope together as I began the walk toward my new beginning. I walked down the aisle with my father, each step steady despite the ache still lingering in my chest from my mother's phone call. Guests smiled and turned to watch, phones raised, capturing a moment I wished felt whole. I kept my eyes fixed on James, letting his warm smile anchor me. The string lights swayed gently overhead, and the scent of fresh roses filled the air. But none of it could fully quiet the hollow feeling my mother's laughter had left behind. James reached for my hand the moment I stepped beside him, his fingers wrapping around mine with quiet reassurance. He must have noticed something in my eyes, because he leaned close and whispered, "You okay?" I nodded quickly, forcing a smile, unwilling to let my mother's absence steal this moment from us. The officiant began speaking, but I only half heard the words, my mind still tangled between joy and quiet heartbreak. As the ceremony continued, I glanced toward the empty seat in the front row where my mother should have been sitting. My aunt sat beside it awkwardly, unsure whether to acknowledge the space. I forced my gaze back to James, refusing to let the empty chair define my wedding day. His thumb brushed gently over my knuckles, grounding me, reminding me that not everyone in my life chose to disappear when it mattered most. The officiant asked us to face each other for our vows, and James's eyes locked onto mine with such steady warmth that my breath caught. "Sarah," he began, his voice slightly shaking, "you make every ordinary day feel like something worth celebrating." Tears welled in my eyes again, but this time they weren't from pain. For a brief moment, my mother's absence faded into the background of everything James was giving me. When it was my turn to speak, my voice trembled as I tried to steady myself. "James, you've shown me what it means to be chosen, truly chosen, every single day." The words carried more weight than I expected, especially with my mother's earlier laughter still echoing faintly in my mind. I saw James's eyes soften, understanding passing quietly between us without either of us needing to say anything more. We exchanged rings beneath the string lights, the metal cool against my trembling fingers. Claire stood just behind me, holding my bouquet, her eyes glistening with quiet pride. I could feel the warmth of everyone watching, friends and family who had shown up, who had chosen to be present. It struck me then how many people did care, even if the one person I desperately wanted there had chosen somewhere else entirely. The officiant pronounced us married, and cheers erupted through the garden as James pulled me into a soft, lingering kiss. For a few seconds, everything else disappeared. The hurt, the confusion, the ache of my mother's absence. There was only James, only this moment we had built together. When we finally pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, and he whispered, "We did it." like it was our secret to keep. We walked back down the aisle together as husband and wife, guests cheering and tossing flower petals into the air. I laughed despite the tears still clinging to my lashes, letting myself feel the joy fully for the first time all day. James squeezed my hand tightly, pulling me closer as we reached the end of the aisle, both of us breathless with happiness and disbelief that this moment had finally arrived. Photos came next, a blur of smiling faces and careful posing beneath the late afternoon sun. Every time the photographer called for family shots, I felt a small pang remembering the empty space my mother should have filled. My father stood in for both roles as best he could, squeezing my shoulder gently whenever he noticed my smile faltering. I appreciated him more in that moment than I think I ever had before. During a quiet break between photos, Claire pulled me aside near the garden fountain, checking if I was really okay. "I keep thinking about it," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. How could she choose a beach over this? Claire had no perfect answer, only a tight hug and the reminder that today was still mine, regardless of the choices our mother had made hours earlier. The reception began as the sun dipped lower, string lights flickering on across the tent where round tables waited beneath soft floral centerpieces. James twirled me onto the dance floor for our first dance, his hand steady against my back. "Forget about this morning," he murmured against my ear. "Today is about us." I let myself sink into his arms, allowing the music to slowly ease the tension still knotted inside my chest. Throughout dinner, guests offered warm toasts, sharing stories about James and me that made the whole tent erupt into laughter. My father stood to speak, his voice thick with emotion as he talked about watching me grow into the woman standing before everyone tonight. I smiled through tears, grateful for his presence, even as a small part of me kept glancing toward the entrance, half hoping my mother might still appear. She didn't come. As the evening stretched on, that hope quietly faded, replaced by a strange numbness I hadn't expected to feel on my own wedding day. Claire noticed the shift and pulled me onto the dance floor for a silly, upbeat song, determined to keep my mind occupied. I laughed harder than I had in hours, letting myself finally release some of the tension that had built since that morning's phone call. Later, during a quiet moment near the dessert table, my phone buzzed with a text. My stomach tightened instinctively, bracing for my mother's name. Instead, it was a photo from Claire, capturing James and me laughing together during our first dance. I stared at it for a long moment, realizing that even without my mother present, this day had still been filled with genuine love and celebration. James found me standing there, phone in hand, and gently wrapped his arms around my waist from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. I hesitated, then admitted quietly, "I keep wondering what I did wrong, why a trip mattered more than me." His grip tightened protectively. "You didn't do anything wrong, Sarah. This was never about you not being enough." We stepped outside the reception tent for a moment of quiet, the cool evening air a welcome relief from the noise inside. James held my hand as we looked up at the darkening sky, stars beginning to appear faintly above us. "I promise I'll never make you feel replaced," he said softly. I squeezed his hand tightly, letting his words settle deep into the ache my mother had left behind that morning. When we returned inside, the DJ announced the final dances of the night, and guests gathered close around the floor. I danced with my father again, his eyes glistening as he spun me gently beneath the lights. "I'm proud of you," he whispered, "no matter what happened today." I nodded, unable to speak, grateful he had shown up fully even as someone else had chosen to stay away. As midnight approached, guests began saying their goodbyes, hugging us tightly and wishing us well. Claire lingered longest, holding on to me a little tighter than usual. "Call her tomorrow," she suggested gently. "Maybe she'll explain." I nodded, though doubt already sat heavy in my chest, unsure if any explanation could truly soften what I had felt standing in that hotel room hours earlier. James and I finally collapsed into a quiet corner booth, exhausted but happy, surrounded by the remnants of decorations and half-eaten cake. He studied my face carefully, brushing a strand of hair from my cheek. "Today was still perfect," he said firmly, "because I got to marry you." I smiled, letting his certainty chip away slightly at the sadness still lingering beneath the surface of my joy. Driving away from the venue later that night, I watched the lights fade behind us through the car window, the events of the day replaying quietly in my mind. James reached over and held my hand across the console, silent but present, exactly what I needed after everything. I rested my head against the seat, exhaustion finally settling in after hours of forcing myself to stay composed. Back at the hotel, I finally allowed myself to cry freely, the tears I had held back all day spilling out the moment the door closed behind us. James didn't try to stop them. Instead, he simply held me close, letting me release everything I had swallowed since that phone call that morning. "She missed something incredible," he whispered into my hair, and I believed him, even through my tears. Lying awake later that night, James asleep beside me, I found myself scrolling back through old photos on my phone, searching for happier memories with my mother. I found birthdays, holidays, ordinary afternoons, and yet a familiar pattern began emerging the longer I looked. This wasn't the first time she had chosen herself over me, though it was certainly the most painful example so far. I set my phone down finally, staring at the ceiling as memories from my childhood began surfacing unwillingly. Recitals she missed, promises she broke, birthdays celebrated without her presence because something else had always seemed more important. Today's phone call wasn't an isolated incident. It was simply the latest chapter in a much longer story I had spent years trying not to fully acknowledge. James stirred beside me, sensing my restlessness even in sleep, and pulled me closer instinctively. I let myself relax slightly into his warmth, grateful for someone who consistently showed up, unlike the pattern I now recognized clearly from my mother. As exhaustion finally pulled me toward sleep, I couldn't shake the memories rising to the surface, memories that stretched far beyond just today's disappointment. Somewhere in the quiet darkness of that hotel room, I began piecing together a truth I had avoided facing for years. My mother's absence today wasn't sudden or unexpected if I looked honestly at our history together. Growing up, she had always found reasons to put herself first, leaving me to wonder, even as a child, whether I would ever truly be enough to matter more than whatever she wanted instead. That night, lying beside James in the quiet hotel room, I let myself drift fully into the past, replaying moments I had spent years brushing aside. I thought of my 8th birthday, waiting by the window for Mom to come home from what she called just one quick errand. She returned 4 hours later, breezy and unapologetic, while my cake sat untouched on the counter and my friends had already gone home. I remembered my 6th grade piano recital, the one I had practiced for months, fingers aching from repetition just to make her proud. I searched the audience that evening, scanning row after row, but her seat remained empty. Dad clapped loudest from the back, mouthing, "I'm here," when he caught my eyes searching. Mom texted afterward, saying something had come up, the same phrase she always used. High school graduation had been another quiet disappointment I'd tucked away without fully processing. She promised she would be there, had even helped me pick out my dress the week before. But that morning, she called saying a work opportunity couldn't wait, that she'd make it up to me somehow. I stood on that stage searching the crowd anyway, some small part of me still hoping she might surprise me. I thought about the pattern forming across years of my life, small cracks I had learned to patch over with excuses I made for her. She's just busy. She didn't mean it. She loves me in her own way. I had repeated those phrases so often they became reflexive, protective armor against admitting what I truly felt whenever she chose something else over me. There had been good moments too, ones I clung to fiercely whenever doubt crept in. Sunday mornings making pancakes together when I was young, her laugh filling our small kitchen, road trips where she'd sing loudly off-key, making me laugh until my stomach hurt. Those memories felt like proof she loved me, evidence I used to convince myself the pattern wasn't really a pattern at all. But lying there that night, exhaustion stripping away my usual defenses, I finally let myself see the truth clearly. The good moments had grown rarer as I got older, replaced increasingly by canceled plans and last-minute excuses. Somewhere along the way, I had become someone she loved in theory, someone she'd show up for only when nothing more interesting competed for her attention. I thought back to that morning's phone call, replaying every word now that shock had worn off enough to let real hurt settle in. "Mom, it's happening today," I had said, my voice trembling with hope despite years of evidence suggesting hope might be misplaced. Her laughter still echoed clearly in my memory, careless and light, completely disconnected from the significance of the day. "Oh, sweetheart, I completely forgot," she'd said, though I now doubted forgetting was really what had happened. People didn't simply forget their only daughter's wedding date after months of planning and dozens of conversations about dress fittings and seating charts. She hadn't forgotten. She had decided something else mattered more, then dressed that decision up as an accident. "I'm actually on a beach right now," she'd continued, as though mentioning the weather rather than abandoning me on the most important day of my life. I remembered gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles had turned white, disbelief crashing over me in waves I hadn't fully processed until this quiet moment, hours later, lying in the darkness beside my sleeping husband. "A trip sounded more fun than sitting through another long ceremony," she'd added, and those words had lodged themselves somewhere deep inside my chest, refusing to loosen their grip even now. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I made a mistake." Just an honest admission that entertainment had outweighed her daughter's wedding, delivered with the same casual tone she might use discussing lunch plans. I remembered asking, voice barely steady, "You forgot?" hoping desperately she would backtrack, would suddenly panic and promise to catch the next flight home. Instead, she had corrected me plainly. "No, I didn't forget. I just decided this trip sounded better." The honesty had somehow cut deeper than any lie could have, stripping away any comforting excuse I might have clung to afterward. Claire had taken the phone from my shaking hands when she saw I couldn't speak anymore, her voice sharp with disbelief as she confronted our mother directly. I hadn't been able to make out every word through my own spiraling thoughts, only fragments of Mom's light, unbothered responses drifting through the receiver, completely detached from the devastation unfolding in that hotel room. Now, hours later, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped in the moment. This wasn't really about one missed wedding, one canceled appearance, one careless comment about beaches and long ceremonies. This was the culmination of years spent quietly absorbing the message that I would always rank below whatever else caught her interest, whatever else promised more excitement or ease. I thought about all the times I had made excuses for her to friends, to James, even to myself. She's just not great with commitments. She loves differently than other moms. I had built an entire vocabulary designed to soften a truth I wasn't ready to face directly. Tonight, stripped of adrenaline and forced composure, that vocabulary finally failed me completely. James shifted beside me, his arm tightening slightly around my waist even in sleep, as though sensing my restlessness. I studied his face in the dim light, grateful for someone who had shown up fully today, who had chosen me publicly and without hesitation in front of everyone who mattered. The contrast between his presence and my mother's absence felt sharper now than it had all day. I wondered what I would say to her when we finally spoke again, whether I even wanted to speak with her at all in the immediate aftermath. Claire's suggestion to call tomorrow echoed in my mind, practical and gentle, urging me toward eventual reconciliation. But something new had hardened inside me tonight, something that resisted the idea of simply accepting another easy apology. I remembered similar apologies from years past, always delivered with the same practiced ease. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I really am." followed inevitably by another instance of the same behavior, another event attended half-heartedly or missed entirely. Each apology had bought her forgiveness cheaply, without ever requiring real change, without ever costing her anything beyond a few soft words. Tonight felt different somehow, heavier, more final in a way I couldn't quite articulate yet. Perhaps it was the significance of the day itself, my wedding, a milestone too large to easily excuse away. Or perhaps years of smaller disappointments had simply accumulated until they reached a breaking point I could no longer ignore or minimize for her comfort. I thought about my father, steady and present throughout every important moment of my life, stepping into roles that weren't originally his to fill. He had walked me down the aisle today, had toasted our marriage with genuine emotion, had shown up fully in every way my mother consistently failed to. The imbalance between them had never felt more glaring than it did tonight. Somewhere around 2 a.m, exhaustion finally began pulling at my eyelids, though sleep still felt distant and elusive. I found myself whispering quietly into the darkness, not quite a prayer, not quite a promise, something in between. "I deserve better than this," I murmured, testing the words, surprised by how true and necessary they felt leaving my lips. I thought about the woman I wanted to become, the kind of mother I hoped to be someday if James and I were blessed with children of our own. I promised myself silently that I would never let anything, no trip, no distraction, no fleeting desire for comfort, outweigh showing up fully for the people who needed me most, especially on days that mattered. James stirred again, murmuring something unintelligible before settling back into deep sleep, his warmth a steady comfort against the chaos still swirling through my thoughts. I pressed closer to him, letting his steady breathing anchor me the way it had all evening. Whatever came next with my mother, I knew I wouldn't be facing it entirely alone anymore. I glanced toward my phone one final time, half expecting a late message of apology that never came. The screen remained dark, silent, exactly as it had been since that morning's devastating call. Somehow, the silence stung almost as much as her laughter had earlier, confirming that no immediate remorse was coming, no last-minute realization of what she had truly missed. As sleep finally began pulling me under, one thought remained clear above all the tangled emotions of the day. Tomorrow, I would have to decide what came next, how much space I was willing to give someone who had chosen herself so completely, so casually, on a day I would remember for the rest of my life, for better or worse. I woke the next morning to sunlight streaming across the hotel bed. James still asleep beside me, his arm draped protectively over my waist. For a moment, I forgot everything, wrapped only in the quiet peace of being newly married. Then memory returned in a slow, heavy wave, my mother's laughter echoing faintly in the back of my mind as I stared up at the ceiling, processing what yesterday had truly cost me. I slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake James, and wandered to the window overlooking the quiet street below. My phone sat on the nightstand, screen still dark, still silent since that devastating call. Part of me kept hoping for a message, some sign of regret or acknowledgement. The silence felt like its own kind of answer, one I wasn't ready to fully accept yet. Claire knocked softly on the door an hour later, holding 2 coffees and a bag of pastries from the shop downstairs. "Thought you might need this," she said gently, stepping inside. I accepted the coffee gratefully, grateful for her presence, for someone who consistently showed up without needing to be asked twice or convinced of my worth. We sat together at the small table near the window, James still sleeping in the next room, giving us space to talk quietly. "How are you feeling?" Claire asked carefully, studying my face for signs of how deeply yesterday had cut. I hesitated, turning my coffee cup slowly in my hands. "Numb, mostly," I admitted, like I'm still waiting for it to feel real. "You don't have to pretend with me," Claire said softly, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "What she did was wrong, Sarah. Completely wrong." Her words, though comforting, didn't erase the confusion still tangled inside me. Part of me wanted to defend our mother instinctively, the way I always had, while another part finally felt too exhausted to keep making excuses. I keep replaying her laugh, I confessed quietly, staring down at the table. That casual, careless laugh, like missing my wedding was nothing at all. Claire's expression hardened slightly, protective anger flashing behind her eyes. "She's always done this," she said firmly. "You've just never let yourself see it as clearly as you're seeing it now." I thought about the ceremony itself, how I had smiled through every moment despite the ache sitting heavy in my chest. James's vows, the exchange of rings, the walk back down the aisle as husband and wife. On the surface, everything had looked perfect, exactly like the wedding I had dreamed about for years. Underneath, I had been quietly holding myself together, refusing to let anyone see how deeply I was hurting. "Do you think she even realizes what she missed?" I asked Claire, genuinely uncertain of the answer. Claire considered the question carefully before responding. "I think she knows exactly what she missed," she said slowly. "I just don't think it matters to her the way it should. That's the part that's hard to accept, but it's the truth." Her words settled uncomfortably in my chest, echoing thoughts I had barely allowed myself to fully form the night before. I had spent years constructing gentle explanations for my mother's behavior, softening her choices into something more forgivable. Claire's blunt honesty, though painful, felt like a necessary crack in the protective wall I had built around the truth. "I don't want to hate her," I said quietly, surprising myself with how much I meant it despite everything. "But I don't know how to just move past this either." Claire nodded understandingly, wrapping her hand around mine again. "You don't have to decide everything today," she said gently. "Just focus on today being about you and James, not about her." James emerged from the bedroom shortly after, hair tousled, expression soft with concern when he saw my red-rimmed eyes. He crossed the room quietly and pressed a kiss to my forehead before sitting beside me. "Morning," he murmured, glancing between Claire and me, sensing the weight still lingering in the room from yesterday's events. "We were just talking about Mom," Claire explained gently, giving James space to respond however felt right. He nodded slowly, reaching for my hand beneath the table. "For what it's worth," he said carefully, "yesterday was still one of the best days of my life. Nothing about that changes because of her choices." His words eased something tight in my chest, reminding me that my wedding day hadn't been defined solely by my mother's absence. There had been genuine joy too, real love surrounding me from people who had chosen to show up fully. I squeezed James's hand, grateful for his steady presence through everything, especially during moments I hadn't expected to need reassurance so badly. Claire finished her coffee and stood, gathering the empty pastry bag from the table. "I should let you two enjoy your first morning as newlyweds," she said with a small smile, trying to lighten the mood slightly. Before leaving, she paused at the door, turning back toward me with a serious expression. "Don't let her guilt you into pretending this didn't happen, Sarah." After Claire left, James and I sat quietly together, sunlight warming the small table between us. "What are you thinking?" he asked eventually, studying my face carefully. I exhaled slowly, trying to organize the swirl of emotions still tangled inside me. "I keep wondering if I'll ever stop making excuses for her," I admitted honestly, voice barely above a whisper. James considered his words carefully before responding, clearly wanting to support me without forcing any particular reaction. "You don't owe her constant forgiveness," he said gently, "especially not without her actually changing anything." His perspective, steady and honest, offered a kind of clarity I hadn't been able to find entirely on my own throughout the sleepless hours before dawn. We spent the rest of the morning quietly, packing for our short honeymoon trip we had planned nearby, trying to focus on the future rather than yesterday's disappointment. Still, every so often, my mind drifted back to that phone call, to her careless laughter, to the casual way she had dismissed something so significant in my life without any real acknowledgement of the hurt it caused. By early afternoon, as we loaded suitcases into the car, my phone buzzed unexpectedly. My heart jumped, half hoping, half dreading it might finally be her. Instead, it was a group message from extended family members, congratulating us on the wedding, completely unaware of what had happened behind the scenes. I typed a brief, "Thank you," unable to explain the full truth in a simple text. James noticed my expression shift and reached over, squeezing my shoulder gently. "You don't have to explain everything to everyone," he reminded me softly. "This is your story to share however and whenever you're ready." I nodded, grateful again for his patience, for the space he consistently gave me to process everything at my own pace, without pressure or judgment. As we drove toward our honeymoon destination, I stared out the window, watching familiar streets fade into unfamiliar scenery. Somewhere between exhaustion and quiet resolve, I made a decision I hadn't fully articulated until that moment. I wouldn't reach out to my mother first, not this time. If she wanted to explain herself, she would need to be the one to initiate that conversation. James reached over and turned on quiet music, filling the silence comfortably without forcing conversation. I rested my head against the window, watching the world blur past, allowing myself finally to feel something close to peace, despite everything unresolved. Whatever came next with my mother, I knew I had people around me who genuinely valued my presence without conditions or excuses. 2 weeks passed quietly after that, filled with honeymoon adventures, quiet dinners, and slowly settling into married life alongside James. I checked my phone occasionally, half expecting to hear from my mother, though the silence between us stretched longer than it ever had before. Part of me wondered if she was simply enjoying her trip, undisturbed by the distance growing steadily between us. Then, on an otherwise ordinary afternoon while James and I unpacked boxes in our new apartment, my phone rang unexpectedly. I glanced at the screen, surprised to see Claire's name flashing instead of our mother's. Something about the timing, about Claire calling directly rather than texting as usual, sent a small ripple of unease through me before I even answered. I answered the phone with a strange knot forming in my stomach, Claire's name still glowing on the screen. "Hey, what's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light despite the unease creeping through me. There was a brief pause before Claire spoke, her tone tighter than usual, carrying none of her typical easy warmth. "Sarah, it's Mom," she said carefully. "Something's happened." My heart lurched immediately, a dozen worst-case scenarios flashing through my mind in rapid succession. "Is she okay?" I asked quickly, gripping the phone tighter as James looked up from the box he was unpacking, sensing the shift in my expression. Claire hesitated again before answering. "She's fine physically, but she's stranded at the resort. Her card got declined." I stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what Claire was telling me. "Stranded? What do you mean stranded?" I asked, disbelief coloring my voice. Claire exhaled slowly on the other end. "Apparently the resort charged her card for extra nights, and it got declined. They're holding her luggage until she pays. She's been calling around, and now she's asking if you can help." The irony of the situation hit me almost immediately, sharp and unavoidable. The same trip she had chosen over my wedding was now the very thing leaving her stranded, asking for the daughter she had abandoned to bail her out. "She's asking me?" I repeated, my voice flat with disbelief. Claire's silence on the other end confirmed everything I already suspected about the awkwardness of the request. James set down the box he had been holding and moved closer, his hand resting gently on my shoulder as he listened to my side of the conversation. I covered the phone briefly, whispering the situation to him. His eyebrows rose slightly, though he said nothing, simply waiting to see how I wanted to handle something so complicated and emotionally loaded so soon after everything that had happened. "Sarah, are you still there?" Claire asked gently, her voice softening as she sensed my hesitation stretching into silence. Yeah, I'm here, I finally said, sitting down slowly on the edge of an unpacked box. I don't even know what to say right now. She missed my wedding for this trip, and now she wants me to fix it when it goes wrong? Claire sighed heavily on the other end, clearly caught in an uncomfortable position between us. I know how it sounds, she admitted. Believe me, I told her the same thing when she called me first. But she's really stuck, Sarah. She doesn't have anyone else to ask, and the resort is threatening to involve local authorities if the bill isn't settled soon. I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers against my temple as competing emotions surged through me all at once. Anger, disbelief, guilt, and something close to bitter amusement all tangled together uncomfortably. Part of me wanted to hang up immediately, to let her figure out her own consequences after choosing herself so completely just weeks earlier without a second thought about how it would affect me. Why should I help her? I asked quietly, more to myself than to Claire, though the question hung heavily in the space between us. Claire didn't answer right away, giving me room to sit with the question honestly. You don't have to, she finally said. No one would blame you if you said no, but I wanted you to know before deciding anything either way. James crouched down in front of me, meeting my eyes directly, his expression calm and supportive without pushing me toward any particular decision. Whatever you choose, he said quietly once I'd ended the call briefly. I'm behind you completely. His steadiness offered a small anchor amid the storm of conflicting emotions swirling rapidly through my mind in that unexpected moment. I thought about my mother's laughter that morning weeks ago, careless and light, completely disconnected from the significance of my wedding day. That memory alone made refusing feel justified, even necessary. Yet another part of me, the part shaped by years of instinctively protecting her, whispered that ignoring her struggle now would somehow make me no better than the choices she had made. I need to think, I said again into the phone once Claire and I resumed talking, my voice steadier now despite the turmoil still churning beneath the surface. This isn't something I can just decide in the next 5 minutes. Claire agreed quickly, her tone gentle and understanding. Take whatever time you need, Sarah. I'm not trying to pressure you into anything. After we hung up, I sat quietly on the edge of the box, staring blankly at the half-unpacked kitchen items scattered across our new apartment floor. James remained close, patient and silent, giving me space to process everything without offering unsolicited advice. The contrast between his steady presence and my mother's absence during my wedding felt sharper now than ever before. What are you thinking? James finally asked softly, breaking the silence that had settled comfortably between us. I shook my head slowly, still trying to untangle my own conflicting feelings. Part of me wants to let her handle it herself, I admitted. But another part keeps remembering she's still my mother, even after everything that happened. James nodded thoughtfully, choosing his words carefully before responding. It's okay to feel both things at once, he said gently. You don't have to have it all figured out right now. His patience eased some of the pressure building inside me, reminding me that this decision didn't need to be made in a single rushed moment out of guilt or obligation. I stood up slowly and walked toward the window, staring out at the quiet street below our new apartment. Memories from childhood resurfaced unbidden, moments when she had shown up despite everything, tangled uncomfortably with memories of disappointment and canceled plans. The complexity of our relationship refused to fit neatly into a single, easy decision about whether to help her now. I thought about what refusing might actually accomplish, whether it would teach her any lasting lesson or simply deepen the distance already growing steadily between us since the wedding. Part of me wondered if helping her now, despite everything, might open space for an honest conversation we desperately needed. One neither of us had been brave enough to initiate directly until this moment. James joined me by the window, wrapping his arm gently around my shoulders as we both looked out at the darkening sky. Whatever you decide, he said quietly. It doesn't erase what she did. It's not about excusing her behavior. It's about what feels right for you, separate from anything she deserves or doesn't deserve right now. His words settled something restless inside me, clarifying the decision wasn't really about her at all. It was about who I wanted to be, how I wanted to handle conflict and hurt moving forward in my own life. I exhaled slowly, feeling some of the tension in my shoulders ease slightly as clarity began forming through the emotional fog still lingering from Claire's unexpected call. I picked up my phone again, staring at Claire's contact information, still undecided about what exactly I wanted to say when I called her back. James squeezed my shoulder gently, offering silent support without pushing me toward any particular choice. "Take your time," he reminded me softly. "This doesn't need to be resolved tonight if you're not ready." I set the phone down again, deciding I needed more than a few hours to fully process everything before responding to Claire or making any decision about my mother's situation. The weight of the wedding day still lingered heavily, unresolved beneath the surface of this new complication, now unfolding unexpectedly just weeks into married life. That evening, James and I sat together on our couch, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, eating takeout in comfortable silence. My mind kept drifting back to the resort, to my mother stranded and anxious, likely regretting decisions in ways she rarely allowed herself to express openly. I wondered what she was feeling right now, whether guilt had finally caught up with her carelessness. James noticed my distant expression and reached for my hand across the couch cushions. "You don't have to solve this tonight," he reminded me gently, echoing his earlier reassurance. I nodded, grateful again for his patience throughout everything. Though the unresolved situation with my mother continued weighing heavily on my mind well into the quiet hours of that evening. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me toward sleep, though my thoughts remained tangled between anger and reluctant concern for my mother's situation. I still hadn't decided what I would tell Claire, still hadn't fully processed the strange irony of being asked to rescue her from the very trip that had caused so much pain weeks earlier, during one of the most important days of my life. I woke the next morning still undecided, the weight of yesterday's phone call pressing heavily on my chest before I had even fully opened my eyes. James stirred beside me, sensing my restlessness immediately. "Still thinking about your mom?" he asked softly, propping himself up on one elbow. I nodded, rubbing my eyes, exhaustion from a restless night still clinging to me. I made coffee slowly that morning, using the routine as a way to organize my thoughts before facing the decision waiting on my phone. Part of me wanted to refuse outright, to let her sit with the consequences of choosing herself so completely just weeks earlier. Another part, quieter but persistent, reminded me she was still my mother, still someone I had loved my entire life. James joined me in the kitchen, leaning against the counter as he watched me stare blankly at the coffee maker. "You know," he said carefully, "there's no wrong answer here. Whatever you decide says something about you, not about her." His words settled gently over the tangled mess of emotions still churning inside me, offering perspective without pressure. I thought about what it would mean to refuse, to let her feel the sting of abandonment the same way I had felt weeks earlier standing in my wedding dress. There was a certain satisfaction in imagining that kind of justice, a quiet vindication for everything she had put me through. Yet the thought didn't sit as comfortably as I expected it to, leaving something unsettled beneath the surface. "I keep imagining her stuck there," I admitted to James, sitting down at our small kitchen table with my coffee cupped between both hands. Scared, maybe, alone in a foreign resort with no way home. James nodded slowly, listening without interrupting, giving me space to work through the conflicting pull between anger and reluctant compassion. "And then I think about her laughing," I continued, my voice hardening slightly. "About how easy it was for her to choose a beach over watching me get married. Why should I make this easy for her now?" James remained quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully before responding. "You don't owe her ease," he said gently. "But you also don't owe yourself bitterness if it doesn't feel right." I picked up my phone, staring at Claire's name still sitting in my recent calls, unanswered since the previous evening. My thumb hovered over the screen, hesitation freezing me in place despite James's steady presence beside me. Finally, I set the phone back down, deciding I needed a little more time before making a decision I couldn't easily take back. Later that morning, I called Claire back, my voice steadier than I expected despite the uncertainty still churning inside me. I need more time, I told her honestly. This isn't something I can decide overnight, especially after everything that happened at the wedding. Claire's response was immediate and understanding, her voice gentle through the phone. Take whatever time you need, Sarah. How is she doing? I asked, surprising myself with the question, unsure whether concern or simple curiosity had prompted it. Claire hesitated slightly before answering. She sounds stressed, honestly. Scared, maybe, for the first time in a while. Something about hearing that shifted the balance slightly inside me, softening the hard edges of my anger just enough to notice. I spent the rest of that day distracted, unpacking boxes half-heartedly while my mind kept circling back to the situation unfolding at the resort. James noticed my divided attention but said nothing, simply staying close, offering quiet support through small gestures like refilling my coffee or squeezing my shoulder whenever he passed by during our slow unpacking process. That evening, as we sat together watching television without really absorbing anything on screen, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text, not from Claire, but from an unknown number I didn't immediately recognize. My stomach tightened as I opened it, uncertain what to expect after everything that had already unfolded over the past few weeks. The message was short, hesitant, clearly typed and deleted several times based on the awkward phrasing. Sarah, it's Mom. I know I don't deserve to ask this, but I really need your help. I'm sorry, more than you know. I stared at the screen for a long moment, James glancing over curiously when he noticed my expression shift dramatically. I read the message aloud to James, my voice flat, still processing the unexpected directness of her admission. He listened quietly, his expression thoughtful rather than surprised. That's different from her usual apologies, isn't it? He asked carefully. I nodded slowly, recognizing something unfamiliar in the tone, an admission that felt less rehearsed than her typical excuses. She's never actually said she doesn't deserve something before, I said quietly, mostly to myself, turning the phone over in my hands. Every previous apology had come wrapped in justification, softened by excuses about being busy or misunderstood. This message felt different, stripped of her usual defensiveness, though I remained cautious about trusting the shift too quickly. James reached over and took my hand gently, his thumb brushing across my knuckles in a familiar, comforting gesture. What does your gut tell you? He asked softly, not pushing me toward any particular answer. I sat quietly for a moment, genuinely searching for clarity beneath the tangled emotions still competing loudly inside my chest. I said slowly, testing the words as they formed. I think I want to help her. Not because she deserves it, necessarily, but because I don't want to become someone who turns her back on family when they're struggling, even when they've hurt me. James nodded, respecting my decision without offering judgment either way about the choice I was making. I typed back a brief response, still cautious despite my decision to help. I'll take care of the resort bill, but we need to talk when you're home. I hesitated before pressing send, wondering if I was being too soft, too quick to extend help after everything. Still, something about setting a clear boundary alongside the assistance felt like the right balance to strike. Her reply came almost instantly, as though she had been anxiously waiting by her phone the entire time. Thank you, Sarah. I know I don't deserve it. We'll talk, I promise. I stared at the message for a long moment, uncertain whether to feel relieved or exhausted by the whole exchange. The emotional weight of the past few weeks pressing heavily against my chest. James wrapped his arm around me as I set the phone down, sensing the complicated mixture of emotions still swirling through me. You handled that really well, he said softly, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. I leaned into him, grateful for his steady support throughout everything, even when I wasn't entirely certain I had made the right decision myself. I spent the next hour on the phone with the resort, working through payment details and confirming everything needed to resolve the situation my mother had found herself stuck in. The process felt strange, almost surreal, handling logistics for a trip that had caused so much pain just weeks earlier during what should have been one of the happiest days of my life. Once everything was settled, I sat back on the couch, emotionally drained from the entire ordeal. James handed me a fresh cup of tea, settling beside me quietly. "For what it's worth," he said gently, "I think this took real strength, choosing compassion even after everything she put you through." His words offered small comfort amid the exhaustion still weighing heavily on me. I thought about the conversation waiting for us once my mother returned home, wondering what she might say, whether her promise to talk meant genuine reflection or simply another temporary gesture destined to fade once the immediate crisis passed. Uncertainty lingered heavily, though something inside me felt slightly lighter having chosen compassion over spite in that difficult moment. Later that night, lying beside James in the darkness, I found myself hoping, cautiously, that this situation might actually lead somewhere meaningful. Perhaps being stranded, scared, and forced to rely on the daughter she had abandoned might finally shake something loose in her, some recognition of the pattern she had repeated throughout my entire life without ever truly acknowledging its impact. The days following my mother's return home passed slowly, filled with a strange, uneasy quiet neither James nor I quite knew how to name. She hadn't reached out again since her brief promise to talk, and I found myself oddly relieved by the delay, unsure I was ready yet for whatever conversation waited ahead of us both. One evening, while continuing to unpack boxes from our move, James pulled open an old container I hadn't touched in years, filled with photo albums from my childhood. "Look what I found," he said, settling onto the floor beside me, flipping carefully through yellowed pages filled with faded snapshots of birthdays and holidays long past. I sat beside him, curiosity outweighing my usual reluctance to revisit those particular memories. Page after page revealed moments I barely remembered, small glimpses into a version of my mother I had almost forgotten existed. James paused on one photo in particular, studying it closely before turning it toward me with a soft, curious expression. The photograph showed my mother, impossibly young, cradling me as a newborn in a hospital room filled with balloons and flowers. Her expression in that image was unmistakable, pure adoration, exhaustion mixed with overwhelming love. I stared at it for a long moment, struggling to reconcile that tender image with the woman who had laughed carelessly over the phone weeks earlier. "She looks so happy here," James said quietly, tracing his thumb gently along the edge of the photograph. I nodded slowly, throat tightening unexpectedly as unfamiliar emotion rose within me. "I don't remember ever seeing her look at me like that," I admitted softly, surprised by how much the observation actually hurt to say aloud. We continued flipping through the album together, uncovering more photographs from my early childhood, each one revealing glimpses of warmth I had almost convinced myself never truly existed. My mother pushing me on a swing, laughing freely, sunlight catching in her hair. Another of her reading bedtime stories, my small hand resting trustingly against her arm. "She wasn't always like this," James said thoughtfully, echoing the quiet realization slowly forming inside me as we studied each faded image. I traced the outline of her smiling face in one particular photo, wondering silently what could have shifted so gradually over the years, transforming that attentive young mother into someone who now prioritized comfort over presence. "Something changed," I murmured, more to myself than to James, flipping to a photo taken when I was around 7 years old. Her smile in that image already looked slightly different, more distant, less present despite still being physically close beside me in the picture. The shift felt subtle, yet undeniable once I started actively searching for it. James wrapped his arm around my shoulders as I continued studying the photographs, quietly supporting me through the unexpected wave of emotion stirring within me. "Do you think something happened?" he asked gently, careful not to push too hard toward conclusions I wasn't ready to draw. I shook my head slowly, genuinely uncertain myself. I thought back through fragmented memories of my childhood, searching for any specific moment that might explain the gradual shift I was now noticing so clearly through these old photographs. My parents' relationship had grown strained around that time, arguments becoming more frequent, though I had been too young then to fully understand the tension building steadily between them. Maybe it wasn't one thing, I said slowly, working through the thought as I spoke it aloud. Maybe it was everything happening around the same time. Dad's job stress, their arguments, whatever else was going on that I didn't fully understand as a kid. James nodded thoughtfully, letting me continue processing without interrupting my train of thought. I remembered my parents' eventual separation when I was around 9, the way everything had shifted afterward, my mother suddenly navigating single motherhood while working long hours just to keep us afloat financially. I had never fully considered how that period might have changed her, how survival mode might have gradually reshaped her priorities in ways neither of us had recognized. She was exhausted all the time back then, I said quietly, memories resurfacing with unexpected clarity now that I was actively searching for context rather than simply nursing old resentment. I remember her falling asleep on the couch most nights, still in her work clothes. James listened carefully, letting me untangle years of buried observations. "That doesn't excuse what she did at your wedding," James said gently, careful not to let understanding slide into full justification. "But it might explain part of the pattern." I nodded, appreciating his balanced perspective, neither dismissing my hurt nor allowing convenient excuses to fully absolve her of the choices she had continued making well into my adulthood. I closed the photo album slowly, sitting quietly for a moment as new understanding settled uncomfortably alongside years of accumulated hurt. Somewhere along the way, exhaustion and survival had perhaps become habitual self-protection, a pattern she never fully broke even after circumstances eventually improved, and the original pressures had long since faded. "I wonder if she even realizes she's still doing it," I said softly, staring at the closed album resting in my lap. James considered the question carefully before responding. "Maybe part of your conversation with her should be about that," he suggested gently. "Not just what happened, but why it keeps happening." The idea settled over me slowly, reshaping how I imagined the eventual conversation waiting between my mother and me. Rather than simply confronting her about the wedding alone, perhaps I needed to understand the fuller picture, however painful that understanding might prove to be for both of us moving forward from here. James squeezed my shoulder gently, sensing the shift in my thinking. "You don't have to forgive her right away," he reminded me softly. Understanding and forgiveness aren't the same thing. His words offered clarity I hadn't quite articulated myself, separating two processes I had been unconsciously tangling together throughout the past difficult weeks. I thought about calling her that evening, curiosity now mixing uncomfortably with my lingering hurt and unresolved anger. Part of me wanted answers immediately, wanted to understand exactly what had shifted within her over the years. Another part remained cautious, unwilling to reopen wounds without proper preparation for whatever difficult truths might surface. "Not tonight," I finally decided aloud, setting the photo album carefully back into its box. "But soon." James nodded, respecting my timeline without pushing me toward faster resolution than I felt ready for. We sat together quietly for a while longer, the discovered photographs having shifted something delicate within my understanding of my mother's complicated history. Later that night, unable to sleep despite exhaustion pulling at my eyelids, I found myself scrolling through my phone, staring at my mother's contact information without pressing call. The photographs from earlier lingered vividly in my mind, complicating the straightforward anger I had carried since the wedding with unexpected threads of empathy and lingering questions. James stirred beside me, noticing my restlessness in the darkness. "Can't sleep?" he murmured sleepily, reaching for my hand beneath the blankets. I shook my head, squeezing his hand gently. "Just thinking," I whispered back, my mind still processing everything the old photographs had unexpectedly stirred loose within me tonight. I finally set my phone aside, deciding the conversation with my mother deserved more preparation than a tired 3 in the morning phone call could offer. Tomorrow, I would call Claire, gather my thoughts more carefully, and figure out exactly what I needed to say and hear before finally reaching out to my mother directly about everything that had happened.